My mother-in-law once looked me dead in the eye and called me just the babysitter. It stung more than I cared to admit. After all, I wasn't some outsider hired to watch over her grandkids. I was their mother. I was her son's wife. And yet, in her eyes, I was nothing more than a stand-in, a convenience she could belittle whenever she pleased. Hello, my name is Clara, and before I tell you how my mother-in-law's arrogance backfired in the most delicious way, let me ask, please tell me, from which country are you watching from? I love seeing how far these stories reach. Now back to that day. It was a Sunday evening. We had just finished dinner and my husband was helping clear the table. My mother-in-law, Evelyn, perched in her usual spot, acting like the queen of the household she still believed was hers. She glanced at me with that smug little smirk she wore whenever she wanted to cut me down and said, "Well, at least the babysitter is good for something." Everyone froze. My husband's fork clattered against the plate. Even the kids stopped their chatter. But Evelyn didn't care. She simply leaned back in her chair, proud of herself. I could have snapped back. I could have argued, yelled, defended my role as a wife and mother. But instead I chose silence. I smiled just barely and excused myself to put the kids to bed. Outwardly I looked unbothered. Inwardly, however, I felt something sharper than anger. I felt resolve. You see, Evelyn had always treated me like an unwelcome guest in my own home. From the very beginning she acted as though I wasn't good enough for her son. She questioned my cooking, sneered at my family's modest background, and dismissed every effort I made to bond with her. But this wasn't just about pride anymore. Evelyn had crossed a line. Because what she didn't know was that I held a card she could never have imagined. And it was only a matter of time before I played it. That night, as I tucked my kids in and kissed their foreheads, I thought back to a secret Evelyn didn't even know existed. The house, the very one she acted like she still ruled over, wasn't hers. It wasn't even her son's. It was mine. When my husband and I first got married, we agreed to put the deed in my name. At the time, it was a simple financial decision. His credit wasn't the best and I had savings from years of hard work. It made sense. But I never flaunted it, never lorded it over anyone. I wanted our family to feel secure. Evelyn, however, had spent years boasting to her friends that this was her son's house, the family home she had helped build. She strutted around as though she had authority, never once considering that maybe, just maybe, she was standing on ground she had no claim to. And now, after calling me just the babysitter, she was about to find out the truth in the most humiliating way possible. 2 days later, we had an appointment with a lawyer to finalize some paperwork. Evelyn insisted on tagging along, convinced she was still in charge of family decisions. She walked in with her chin high, dismissing me with a glance like I was invisible. But when the lawyer slid the documents across the table, Evelyn's smirk began to crack. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the name listed on the deed. My name. Clara Anderson. She blinked. Once, twice, her lips parted, but no sound came out. And in that silence, thick, heavy, suffocating, I felt the sweetest rush of vindication. She had spent years reducing me to nothing. A servant. A babysitter. A placeholder. Yet here, in black and white, was proof that the foundation of this family's home, the very walls around us, belonged to the woman she had tried to erase. Her face paled. Her breath hitched. She froze. And I smiled, remembering every insult, every dismissal, every smug look she had ever given me. The babysitter had just become the landlord. And that was only the beginning. From the outside, my marriage looked flawless. 2 loving parents, a happy child, a roof over our heads. But inside there was a silent battle I faced daily. My mother-in-law. She had a way of diminishing me with a smile. In front of neighbors she would say things like, "Oh, bless her heart, she tries her best," as if I were a helpless child instead of the woman who ran her household. When relatives visited, she'd tell stories about how she raised her son right, while implying that I wasn't good enough to deserve him. But what made her words cut deepest was the day she smirked across the kitchen table and called me just the babysitter. Her voice carried through the room, heavy with condescension. She said it in front of my husband, who laughed lightly, brushing it off as a joke. But to me it wasn't funny. It was a dagger. I wasn't just taking care of our daughter. I was the one who built a home, who supported my husband's career when he was starting out, who sacrificed my own ambitions to ensure our family thrived. And yet she reduced me to a hired hand. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding with a mix of rage and clarity. For years, I had endured her dismissive comments, believing silence was strength. But her insult flipped a switch inside me. I realized that my silence had only given her more power. What she didn't know, and what my husband seemed to forget, was that when we bought our house 3 years earlier, it had been my inheritance that made the down payment possible. My father had passed away, leaving me a modest but meaningful sum, and I had insisted that the deed include my name alone. My husband had agreed at the time, brushing it off with a, "We're married, so what's yours is mine." He had no idea how literal that would one day become. The very next morning we were sitting across from a lawyer in a sleek downtown office. My husband had finally convinced me to set up formal estate planning, and I had quietly decided it was the perfect opportunity to put my mother-in-law in her place once and for all. The lawyer shuffled papers, cleared his throat, and began explaining ownership structures and future protections. My husband leaned back confidently, assuming everything would bear his name as the head of the household. My mother-in-law, who insisted on attending, to make sure things were in order, sat with her usual smug expression, glancing at me as though I were merely tagging along. Then came the moment. The lawyer slid a document across the table and said plainly, "As per the current deed, the sole owner of the residence is Mrs. Evelyn Carter." The room froze. My husband blinked in confusion and my mother-in-law's smirk cracked. She straightened in her chair, her eyes darting from the lawyer to me as if she had misheard. "What did you just say?" she demanded. The lawyer, unaware of the storm he had unleashed, repeated calmly, "The house is under Evelyn's name only. That is the legal record." I didn't need to say a word. I simply folded my hands in my lap and met her gaze with a steady, unbothered expression. For once, it was her turn to feel small, powerless, irrelevant. The silence that followed was sweeter than any victory I had ever tasted. And that was only the beginning of her unraveling. The ride home from the lawyer's office was icy. My husband tried to mask his embarrassment with silence, gripping the steering wheel harder than necessary. My mother-in-law, though, couldn't hold back. She leaned forward from the back seat, her voice sharp and trembling. "How could you let her do this? How could you let her own everything while you have nothing?" I almost laughed. "Let me?" The irony was delicious. For years she had treated me as if I were disposable, a background character in my own marriage. Now she was realizing that without me, her son had no home, no security, and no fallback plan. My husband muttered something about us being a team, and how paperwork doesn't change that. But his voice lacked conviction. He knew the truth, and so did she. That evening I found her in my kitchen, arms crossed, her glare burning holes in me. "You tricked him," she hissed. I set down my glass of water calmly and replied, "No. I protected what was mine. There's a difference." For the first time she had no clever comeback. She just stormed out, her pride as shattered as the illusion of control she'd always clung to. But revenge has a way of rippling. In the weeks that followed, her attitude shifted, but not in the way you'd think. Instead of softening, she doubled down. She whispered to my husband that I had manipulated him, that I had set him up to fail, that a real wife wouldn't cling to assets like that. She thought she could drive a wedge between us. What she didn't know was that I was already prepared. I'd started documenting every insult, every undermining comment, every attempt she made to interfere in our marriage. When she tried to sabotage me with other relatives, I had receipts, screenshots of messages she never thought I'd see. When she accused me of being selfish, I laid out the financial records that proved I'd carried more of the load than anyone ever admitted. And then came the dinner party. We had invited a few close relatives over. My mother-in-law, never one to miss an audience, began her usual performance. Subtle digs, painting herself as the matriarch, diminishing me with backhanded compliments. That's when I calmly pulled out a folder I had prepared. With a steady voice, I laid out the facts. The inheritance I'd used to secure our home, the documentation of her toxic behavior, and even the lawyer's confirmation of ownership. The room went silent, eyes darting between me and her. Her face drained of color. For once, she wasn't the puppeteer pulling the strings. He was the one dangling. My husband sat stunned, unable to defend her. Because the truth was undeniable. I looked directly at her and said, "You once called me the babysitter. But remember this, the babysitter owns the roof you're standing under." The table erupted, not with applause, but with an unspoken recognition that the tide had turned. From that night on, she could never look at me the same way. The smirk, the superiority, the constant belittling. It was gone. Did she suddenly treat me with respect? Not exactly. Old habits die hard. But the balance of power shifted forever. She no longer had the leverage she thought she held over me. She no longer had a son who blindly defended her. Me. I didn't just win back my dignity, I secured my place in my own story. Sometimes revenge isn't about yelling or fighting back in the moment. Sometimes it's about patience. About letting someone dig themselves so deep that when you finally reveal the truth, the weight of it crushes them completely. She wanted me to be just the babysitter. But in the end, I was the one holding all the keys. And that's how the woman they mocked as just the babysitter ended up holding all the keys. What do you think? Did I go too far, or was this the justice they deserved? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves a good revenge story, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. New episodes drop every single day, each one more dramatic than the last. So, are you ready for tomorrow's twist?